DSKids, it's Miss Jeanette, and I'm so excited to be with you today. Our lesson today is called, Whom Shall I Fear? And you know, because you know Jesus, that you have nothing to fear. Our pastors today are going to preach about Psalm 27, and we're going to focus today on DSKids on verse 1. It says, The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold, show me your muscles, the stronghold of my life. Whom shall I be afraid? This psalm was written by King David. And in our story today, we're going to hear about David defeating an incredible giant. He not only defeated a giant, but he killed a lion and he killed a bear. And the only way he could have done that is because he knew God was his stronghold. God was there to help him and to save him. So,
my name is Goliath, and I am 9 feet tall. I was one of the greatest warriors the world had ever seen. But that was until I met David and his one true and living God.
So this is the enemy. This is the giant that David is going to fight today in our lesson. Look how tall Goliath is. In the Bible, in our Bible, when we open up to this story, it tells us that Goliath is 9 feet tall.
9 feet!
Look at Miss Jeanette. I would maybe be about the size of David when he goes to battle against Goliath. Okay? David was not old. He was a young man. He was a teenager maybe. Okay? And when he goes out to battle, he sees this giant coming from the hillside. Can you even imagine if you would be on your playground or out in your neighborhood and you would see somebody 9 feet tall, mean, with a sword and a spear, a little bit meaner than this maybe. Would you be afraid? Wouldn't you fear? I know Miss Jeanette would. Look, 9 feet tall, David, when he went out to battle, looked up to this huge giant. But he did not need to fear. He knew God was on his side. And in our lesson today, you're going to get to hear the story about David and Goliath. You've heard the story many times, but today hopefully it'll be just as special as we learn to not fear, because God is our stronghold.
The story of David and Goliath is one of my favorite all-time Bible stories. As the story begins, we see God's chosen people, the Israelites, are being harassed and teased. They're being bothered by the Philistines, which is a country right next to theirs. The Philistines would often come in and take and steal some of their stuff. They would beat some of the Israelites up. Well, on this particular story, the whole army of the Philistines showed up in a valley, and they stayed on one side of the valley on a hill. And they sent out their great warrior Goliath. He was a huge giant, 9 feet tall. And every day, in the morning and in the evening, he would come out, and he would really say some mean things about the Israelites, but especially about their God. He would come out and say that we are a better people because our gods are stronger than your gods. One day he came out and he told them, and he said, I will fight anybody from the nation of Israel. Send out your very best fighter, and they will fight me. And if they beat me, well then we will become your servants. We won't fight you anymore. But if I, Goliath, if I beat you and your great fighter, your great warrior, then you will be our slaves. This went on every morning and every evening for 40 days. Well, there was a very special family in the nation of Israel, a family that God had anointed one of the boys in that family of Jesse. Though he was the youngest of a whole bunch of brothers, his name was David, and God had taken him and anointed him to be king someday. Well, some of David's brothers were in the Israelite army on the other side of the valley when Goliath would come down and taunt them. And so they would hear this, and so David's brothers were on this side, and the Philistines were on this side. And like King Saul, who was afraid, David's brothers were also afraid of Goliath. But one day, Jesse, the father of all of these boys, sent his son David, who was a shepherd, probably about 14 or 15 years old. And he sent his son David to go see how the brothers were doing with the army. So he sent some food with them. And in doing so, when David got there, he got there at just the same time when he was about to give his brothers food to hear this giant Goliath say all these terrible things about the nation of Israel and about God. David got really angry. As a young man, he said, "Why doesn't somebody do something about this?" And his brothers said, "Who do you think you are? Why don't you just be quiet and go back home?" But David was so serious, he said, just let me. I will go fight this man. He should not talk about God this way. He should not talk about our country this way. Well, word reached King Saul, and while King Saul was in one of his tents, he had David come to him. And David came and said, "I have fought when I was caring for my father's sheep. Boy, I've had to fight off some pretty crazy animals to keep my father Jesse's sheep safe. One time, King Saul, I fought off a bear. Another time I fought a lion with my bare hands, and I killed them both to keep my father's sheep safe. You see, God helped to give me the strength to do it. And I know God's going to help me to defeat Goliath too." King Saul was so impressed. He was so impressed with David, he said, "Tell you what, I'm going to give you my armor and my sword and my shield, and I'm going to give all of these things to help keep you safe and protect you from Goliath when you go out to fight him." So David tried all of these things on, and they were just way too big for him. You see, Saul was a big king, and David wasn't fully grown man yet. David tried them on and just said, "I can't wear them. They don't work. They're too big for me, king." So he took them off, and he said, "All I need is my sling." And then he went down to the brook, and he got 5 stones, just like these. And he went out to meet Goliath. Here's a picture that might help you to understand it a little bit better. See, you see the sling there. It's just kind of like a rope with a little piece of cloth there in which you can put the rock. And you swing it around really, 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 really fast so you can throw it even harder than you can throw a baseball or a football. And so when he went out to meet Goliath that day, Goliath couldn't believe it, that the Israelites were going to send out a young man, a boy, to fight him. Well, Goliath said just that. He said, "What kind of nation are you? What kind of people are you that you send out your children to do your fighting? I'm going to take your body and I'm going to feed it to the animals after I'm done with you." Well, I can tell you, most of the men on the hill, like King Saul and all of David's brothers, they were afraid. That's why they didn't even go out to fight Goliath. But even with those words that Goliath was shouting that he was going to kill David, David wasn't afraid. You see, David shouted back to the giant Goliath. He said, "I'm not afraid of you because my God is on my side. This is his battle, and he's going to defeat you. You aren't going to talk about the living God that way." And so David went out, And as they began to fight, David swung his sling many times, and he threw it as hard as he could. And with God's power and sovereignty, with God's guidance, the rock hit him right in the forehead. And all of a sudden, Goliath fell straight to the ground. I don't know how quiet it was, but I would imagine everybody, maybe except David, was completely surprised. The giant, the great warrior Goliath, was dead. All of the Philistines were on that hill watching, and they couldn't believe it. All of the Israelites were on the other side of the hill watching it, and they couldn't believe Goliath was dead either. And David then went over and took control of the situation and cheered for God, and the armies of the Israelites went and chased the Philistines away out of their country. You see, that day, David had won a great victory for Israel, but he'd also won a great victory for God because God was with him. It was really God's battle, and David wasn't afraid.
What an incredible story of courage, of faith, of trust in God, right? David could have feared, he could have been afraid from that big giant, that 9-foot giant he was up against, that nobody else wanted to fight. But David loved the Lord and was not going to put up with the giant and all those other enemies talking poorly about God and his people. So David found his strength, his stronghold. Do that with me. Show me your muscles. Say stronghold was in the Lord. So when he went out with his 5 stones, he had all the confidence in the world because he knew God was on his side. So today, what I want you to do is to think about maybe things that are giant in your life. What are some things that make you afraid? And you can pray to Jesus and ask him to give you the strength, knowing that he's your stronghold, that he will take care of you. Let's fold our hands and bow our heads, and let's say a prayer today, thanking God for all he's done for us and for being with us when we face our giants. Dear Jesus, thank you for being with me always. Thank you for helping me defeat giants that I am up against, just like David. Help me trust you always, knowing that you are with me forever and ever. Amen. Awesome. So I hope you enjoy the psalm today. Moms and dads, feel free to open up the Bible with your kids and read throughout the week again Psalm 27. Like I said, the pastors are going to preach on it. It's going to be beautiful. And our focus was on Psalm 27, verse 1, that our kids know, whom shall I fear? Whom shall I be afraid? That the Lord is their stronghold. So some activities you can do today. As that giant came and visited us, if you can find string or yarn from your moms and dads, and I want you to get a measuring tape, and you can measure out what 9 feet long is, okay? Once you measure that out, you can lay it on the ground, or if your mom and dad let you, you can maybe with some painter's tape that doesn't ruin your wall, tack it up on your wall. And then have your mom or dad or a big brother, big sister, and measure you. Lay on the ground and take a string and measure how long you are and cut the string off. And then I want you to compare how long your string is to how long that of Goliath's was. Okay, so that's a fun activity. The other one is, we know that David grabbed 5 stones. So you can go in your yard or go for a walk, and you can find 5 stones. And then if you have acrylic paint or any paint, you can paint them today, let them dry, and then you can put words of faith on the rock, or you can just simply decorate them. So my little one, who's 3 years old, she simply picked up rocks and then we painted them and we put a little glitter on them. For her, that was a special part of the David stones of our story. My other daughter painted them and then she put the word faith on them and made it a little pretty. You could put courage and trust and words like that. And then you could gift them to people, maybe leave them in people's yards in your neighborhood, or you could put them somewhere in your house to remind you that God is your stronghold and we do not need to fear. God bless you all. Play our song during the week, Whom Shall I Fear, that you find on divinesaviorchurch.com, DSKids, at home, and play that throughout the week so that you can find your strength and your joy throughout the week in God, our stronghold. See you next time. Bye.